Hey, it's all yours, Dr. Assouline. Thank you so much for joining us here on Conversations with CAGT.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. And I was just going to say, for some reason, it went up. It's going up. There we go. There's
Maybe it's
the
like
official
maybe it's like
title.
the way the evening's gonna go. Like we're gonna see how many technical glitches we can work through.
Well, I'm just going to follow your lead because you are very calm, cool, and collected. So if I have any, I'm just going to try to be like that. So, hi, everybody. My name is Susan Assouline, and I'm really excited to have been invited to do this particular presentation. Let me just go ahead since the slide went to the next slide, which is I want to start by thanking you for being here either live and being here tonight. I know there's a lot going on, and many of you have already put in a full day, probably starting 12 or 13 hours ago. So I appreciate what that means for you to be here this evening. And so just, quick little who I am, as you can see on the title here, we're going to have a conversation. So the title of my talk is Let's Talk Acceleration in a Changing Educational Landscape. I am retired, kind of semi-retired, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides when I present to you a particular opportunity. But I am I am retired as a professor of school psychology. I was also the endowed chair for the blank endowed chair at the University of Iowa. And then I retired a couple of years ago from being the director of the Bell and Blank Center for Gifted Education and Talent Development. But I still have an affiliation with them, and that is great. And I will be talking some more about all of those connections and the things that we do. So I just have to, typically it will let me do this. Okay, here we go. So thank you for being here. So let's just take a few seconds to unpack the title, Academic Acceleration. Some of you have probably experienced academic acceleration with a student or yourselves, and some of you may not have had the opportunity to delve into it. And so we'll talk about what it is and who needs it. And then I thought that it was relevant to talk about that within the changing educational landscape. Now, that could take us hours to talk about how the educational landscape has changed just in the past year, let alone the past, 100 years or whatever. But I want to talk a little bit about what is changing and how does that impact the implementation of this particular academic intervention known as acceleration. So let's start with what is it and who needs it? And I always like to start with this story. This is my story about how I got involved with academic acceleration. Now, you saw in the title slide, I introduced myself as retired, but I retired from a lot of my fingers were involved in a lot of different things. Yes, I was in the field of gifted education. I was the director of the Bell and Blank Center, and I worked there for more than 30 years. So I had a lot of opportunities to do things. But before that, I was actually a classroom teacher. I taught at the middle school. I taught science at the middle school for 5 years. And then I became a school psychologist. As a school psychologist, I had to make I was involved in lots of decisions about students who were having learning difficulties. And one of the times that I was involved with decisions, it had to do with whether or not a student should be held back a grade. And this was going, 40 years ago, 35, 40 years ago. And I remember thinking at the time, gosh, I wonder if there's something for students who are ready to move forward and ready to move more quickly. Well, fast forward a little, I got my doctorate. I went and did a postdoctoral study at Johns Hopkins University with the study of mathematically precocious youth. And as a teacher, I learned nothing about bright children in my professional development. And as a school psychologist, I learned even less about what to do with bright children. So anyway, when there are no classes, what do? You develop a class. So I developed a class, and one of the students in my class, a teacher, in those days, we didn't have Zoom capability, et cetera. She drove an hour and a half every Monday night to be at my class and drove an hour and a half back home. And one night she walked into class and she said, I have to show you this letter from my daughter that she gave to the principal and the teacher. And this letter always gets me. And this is how my journey, my story started with academic acceleration. So, dear Mrs. Stevenson and Mr. Jurgensen, Mrs. Steven and Mr. Jurgensen, I find that the work I'm being given is very discouraging because it's much too easy. Most of it I know, so I do the work, catch on, and I have to wait for the others to catch on. The grade I'd like to go to best would be college. But since I can't, could I have something more challenging? Say, for instance, I could go to any grade I want as long as it's in Carpenter or Shannon. I'd like to try fifth grade. I doubt it, but it would be nice to go there and see what it's like. I don't care if I leave Shannon because I really don't have anything really important or true friends that I'd miss. And this letter from Jody, some of you may have seen it because we actually use this letter in one of the tools that we developed to help people make decisions, has a happy ending. But her mom was like, in the class that she was taking was called Assessment of Giftedness. And her mom was like, how do I help my daughter? How can I help my daughter? And we're going to talk about that today. But that's how my story got started. So, what is academic acceleration? Well, here's the official definition. Acceleration is progression through an educational program in a shorter time or at a younger age than is typical. Now, think back to that letter from Jody. She never used the word acceleration. She didn't know she didn't know that wasn't part of her vocabulary. And it wasn't a large part of our vocabulary in general. The regular ed teacher like myself, and even as a school psychologist, we knew about grade retention, but we weren't talking a lot about grade acceleration. I want to just put these words of wisdom from Professor Joyce Van Tassel Basca about, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. I was listening to Joyce give a presentation, and it was like all these light bulbs went off when she said, academic acceleration should be the first intervention that is considered for a highly able students. This does not preclude the implementation of gifted programming, but it should be something that should be considered first. And this was like, oh, wow, I had never thought about that, because I think a lot of times we think, okay, stick with the regular program. If they're gifted, they will have opportunities to work outside of the classroom. But a lot of times people just feel like this is all that might be needed. And maybe it is. But what Joyce is saying here is that we really need to look at the student's overall ability and their aptitude and make sure that they are being fully challenged, which, again, circling back to the slide before with Jody, was exactly what she was asking for. Now, it's not just grade-based acceleration. That's what Jody was talking about. We talk about two broad categories of acceleration: grade-based and subject-based. And there's a way of thinking about them in a pretty handy way. Basically, if you're talking about grade-based, the child does not remain with their same aged peers. Typically, the time in the K-12 setting is shorter unless they go to kindergarten early. And a lot of times they go to kindergarten early, and then they would still have the full 12 years. Social emotional aspects may need to have more consideration than with content or subject-based acceleration. And these are the primary examples: early entrance to kindergarten, skipping a grade, for example, with Jody skipping fourth grade. She wanted to try fifth grade, and then early entrance to college. But a less invasive, a less visible approach to thinking about academic acceleration in general is sometimes it makes the most sense to start with subject-based acceleration. And with subject-based, they stay with the same grade peers for most of the day. They do get advanced content in one or more subjects before their expected grade level. And so we're talking about a different delivery system, if you will, there. There are different ways of providing that advanced content. Social emotional considerations are still relevant, but they may be more related to motivation or other psychosocial aspects. And examples of this, and I'm sure some of you have had lots of opportunities to think about various examples: online courses, combined classes, curriculum compacting, advanced placement in high school, dual enrollment, and there are lots of different ways of thinking about these various forms of acceleration. There are at least 20 forms. And they do fall into those two broad categories of grade-based acceleration and content acceleration. But these are just some of the examples that have been written about. And I think it's important to keep in mind that these forms here are not mutually exclusive. So a student may be accelerated by a grade. Somebody like Jody, they may have been accelerated in the middle of the year from fourth grade to fifth grade. That's what did happen with Jody. She did go to fifth grade. But along the way in high school, she had the opportunity to take some advanced placement classes. And so that's a good example of how they're not mutually exclusive. Now, what do we mean by academic acceleration in the changing educational landscape? I'm going to talk about it primarily from the perspective of kind of chronology, because that is just how I tend to think about things. But I think you may also be able to think about this as well. We're all at different points in our careers. I'm at the one end of my career, and I shared with you some of the things, how things got started. I don't know where you are, but you can think back to what the landscape might have looked like when you were either in school or as a younger child, or where you are now, and how that impacts the implementation of this particular intervention. So in 2004, 20 years, we're going on the 20th anniversary, my colleague, Nicholas Colangelo, who was the founding director of the Bell and Blank Center, and I, along with a colleague of ours from the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, Dr. Merica Gross, who is now deceased, were invited to produce a publication and about academic acceleration. And that invitation came from a funding source because they were curious about the fact that there is so much research supporting the positive impact, both academically and socially, emotionally, on students who have been accelerated, but yet the practice just does not match the research evidence that supports it. So they invited us to do this publication, and we came up with a pretty provocative title, A Nation Deceived: How Schools Hold Back America's Brightest Students. And the whole point of that conversation, it was to start a conversation and really try to address the myths. And we have made a lot of inroads as a large educational community. Much of that is due to the work of the state associations and due to the work of the National Association for Gifted Children. They are the ones on the front lines. You people who are watching this, you're the ones on the front lines And so we brought this forward to work with you to address the myths that are underlying why students aren't accelerated at the rate that one would think they would be ready to be accelerated. Well, 10 years passed pretty quickly, just like 20 years have passed pretty quickly. And we decided that over a 10-year period from 2004 actually to 2015 when it was published, we went from being a nation deceived to a nation empowered because we had even more information supporting the positive impact of academic acceleration on those students who are academically ready for it. So, okay, so each of the two publications came as a 2-volume set. And volume 1 for A Nation Deceived, actually, you can still get on the Bell and Blank Center website. And it's still relevant, even though it was written 20 years ago. The myths that we talk about and the historical perspective that we gave in that publication. And it's really I think it's a great little piece because it was really intended, we call it the colorful volume, because it was intended for educators and parents to share with busy people like administrators and school board members, people who have a lot of things that they have to think about, because the chapters are like literally, I'm not exaggerating, 2 paragraphs long. It's very colorful, it's very succinct, and it gives a lot of really great information. It works so well that we did the same thing with A Nation Empowered. We have the colorful version, which is really the stories of acceleration and the kids who've been accelerated and what it means for them, for their families, for their teachers. And then we have a second volume, which is why acceleration works. It's the research underlying why it works. And that, I like to say, was made for other busy people, but people who are in the field, like the people who are on Facebook here and participating in this, because as educators, you're the ones who need to have the opportunity to think about the extensive amount of information that's out there and how that can help you advocate for the students in your classroom and or even the students who you know personally. One of the myths that seems to keep cropping up is that students should not be accelerated because that will impact their social emotional development. And a lot of research has been done over and over and over the years. And the research is just unequivocal. Students who are accelerated like being placed with their academic peers who have similar interests and similar intellectual development. The research is overall positive, neutral to positive. It does not negatively impact them, and it may actually help them because they're not dealing with being disengaged from the learning process. And so basically this definitive study by Bernstein, Lubinsky, and Bimbo just are that those concerns, the myths, are actually fruitless. And that's true for subject acceleration as well as whole grade acceleration. Acceleration actually supports the social development from kindergarten to college. Now, we don't have time tonight, even though it's one of my favorite topics to go into a lot of detail, but I'd like for us to think about the 4 key points about the research evidence, which again supports the academic, psychological, and social emotional benefits. We have found that twice exceptional students have been successfully accelerated, but the key is understanding how the diagnosed disorder impacts the student. There are decision-making tools to facilitate the process of determining the best match. Oh, I forgot to change this slide. This was something I gave in Michigan. I will fix this Colleen, before I give it to you. Your Colorado colleagues and the Bell and Blank Center can offer collaboration and support. And then doing nothing, and I think this is really important, doing nothing is still doing something, and there are consequences of inaction. And the biggest consequence of inaction is that we run the risk of having the student become disengaged from the learning process. Now, I'm not going to spend much more time talking about subject acceleration. I mentioned it a little bit, but a couple of the benefits are that students who have uneven academic profiles who need acceleration in their area of strength, that's a really large benefit. And I'm quite familiar with working with mathematically talented students who just need acceleration in the area of mathematics. Sometimes it's reading, sometimes it's some type of science. You can have several subjects in which a student is accelerated, but they're still mostly with their age peers. Also, some students may have already skipped a grade, but they still need additional acceleration for extraordinary ability in a particular content area. And math, again, is a very good example. I do want to talk very briefly about whole grade acceleration and the three main forms. And then I have a star here focused on this one because this is what Jody was talking about. Early entrance to kindergarten is one form of grade-based acceleration. Early entrance to college or university is another form. And while we're on early entrance to college or university, let me just say that one of the things that has changed in the educational landscape over the past 30 years is that 30, 40 years ago, if a student wanted to go to college or university early, they were pretty much on their own. But over the years, there have been programs that are designed to support a cohort of students entering college early. And there are also a lot of programs that have high schools, the last 2 years of high school on a college campus, so that students are finishing high school while taking college coursework. And that is another good way of thinking about having students go to college early. But the one I want to talk about now, because the one that really impacts students, especially in grades K through 8, is the one that's known as kind of a grade skip, moving up an entire grade during elementary, middle, or high school. And it can happen before the school year begins or during the school year. What Jody was expressing was, could she please get something that would allow her to be more challenged? And that's why she wanted to move to 5th grade. And they did plan it for the beginning of the spring semester, which, as we all know, spring starts in the middle of January. There are tools that have been developed by myself and my colleagues through the Bell and Blank Center. Some of you may be familiar with the Iowa Acceleration Scale. It's a paper and pencil checklist that indicates whether a student is a good candidate. But we have a new one that came out a few years ago called the Integrated Acceleration System. And the key to this is that it is online and interactive, but it produces a comprehensive report that talks about the appropriateness of academic acceleration for this particular student. Is it a good match? It's online, it's interactive. You have full access to the experts at the Bell and Blank Center, especially in the area of twice-exceptionality. We have expanded upon the student interview questions. And again, it produces a multi-page report that is produced at the conclusion of a team meeting. And then that report is emailed to each of the team members. And two very important people to have at that team meeting, of course, the facilitator, who is oftentimes the gifted education person in their school. Oftentimes the principal, the administrator is involved in this, but the current teacher and the receiving teacher are critical, and the parents are critical to have as part of that team meeting. In fact, as we were thinking about the online system, we decided to take a few lessons from special education and the child study teams. These are lessons that were part of my background as I was working as a school psychologist. Parents have to be included and informed along the way. The breadth of the subject and objective data collected over time in different settings is really an important part of thinking about making this decision. Pre-planned meetings with an agenda are essential, and reevaluating often is also important. And then create plans that can be changed over time if necessary. Recognize that there are a variety of stakeholders, the child, the teacher, the parent, the administrator, other support personnel that are involved in this. And then basically what happens is this program, this interactive online support tool, takes you through the decision-making process using data-based evidence. So the way we like to think about it is it's a process. That word is really important. It is a high stakes decision with long-term consequences. And so you want to really think about that as being based upon a process and trust the process. Don't take any shortcuts. And really think about ways that the team members can be empowered through the data that they provide. And then, as mentioned, the information is shared among the parents, teachers, administrators, and other team members. The integrated acceleration system is comprised of a series of modules, taking a look at the student's performance in school, friendships, motivation, physical development, student attitude about being challenged in school, communication between the parent and the school. And then this is absolutely essential. All of these are essential, but understanding the student's general cognitive ability, which is oftentimes determined through some type of ability test, like the cognitive abilities test. Understanding what the student's achievement levels are. What have they learned? What have they mastered? But that middle one, hesitate to touch my mouse, that aptitude is absolutely critical, because measuring aptitude through some type of above level assessment will allow you to predict the likelihood of success in the accelerated grade. And that is absolutely key, being able to do that. So I mentioned that I was still, that I wasn't fully retired, and that's because I am continuing to work with colleagues at the National Center for Research on Gifted Education, the NCRGE, at the University of Connecticut. And they received a grant to conduct a major study, and acceleration is part of that major study. So this is an invitation for you to consider whether or not you'd like to participate in that. You can email me and I will give you more details. I think that QR code works. It did a little while ago. That can give you more details by going to the NCRGE website. But basically, my question to you is, would you or your colleagues like to implement acceleration decisions with confidence? If so, you get free online professional learning, real-time support in making the decisions, and you really will get to be part of a research partnership between Colorado schools serving grades 2 to 5 and the NCRGE. And I know that there's a small little stipend that goes along with that as well. And you get free access to the integrated acceleration system along with a lot of support. So I would encourage you to think about it and share that with your colleagues. Okay, so we started with the story. I really feel that putting Jody, and I talked about the changing educational landscape. Here's Jody's story on this side. And then here's a story from Regan, who was accelerated a couple of years ago, but it's just juxtaposed against Jody's, who was really, she was struggling because there was no system in place, no process in place that her mother or other people in the school could look to. but Regan had a system in place. Her teacher went through the integrated acceleration system. And then a year later, the teacher asked Regan, well, what was your experience? Just like my experience in fourth grade, she went from second to fourth grade. At the end of the year in second grade, they made the decision to have her start in fourth grade. So far, it's actually been amazing because I'm finding the work to not be that hard. The best part of being in fourth grade is that I love my teacher and I'm making a lot of friends really easily. Fourth grade isn't too challenging because most of the stuff that is new for me is new for the other kids too. My advice is that even if you don't want to skip a grade, it is better to have work that is hard than to have work that is too easy. If I didn't skip a grade, I definitely would have regretted it because the work would be too easy. And, out of the mouths of the students, I love that you're inviting students to talk for 20 seconds about the impact of their programming as part of this CAGT conference. And I just think that this really drives home the point about, number one, how important our stories are. Number two, how we can all make a difference. And we're in this for the students. And number three, there's a lot of support out there. And I think you want to just keep asking, kind of what Regan said at the end there, what happens if we don't accelerate? It's an important question to consider. The research does talk about the fact that there are consequences of inaction. Doing nothing is still a decision, it's a choice. And even if right at this time, acceleration is not the best match for a student, it could be reconsidered in the future, or one could take small baby steps and think about it with regard to subject acceleration. 3 takeaways: there are tools available, acceleration works, and you are not alone. CAGT and the Bell and Blank Center are there to support you. And I would just like to finish with asking you to consider what you might do next. Participate in the Yukon Research Project, register for CAGT Annual Conference, visit the Acceleration Institute website, share ideas from this presentation with an administrator, and review whether your district has a policy regarding acceleration or maybe something else. It's your story. You're going to add to it in ways that make the most sense for you. And we'd love to be a part of it with you. Here is that URL again, if you're interested in this opportunity. And I want to thank you, and I hope that you have a lovely evening, and I would love to take any questions that you have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we do have a comment that I would like to hear your thinking on, and then a question as well. So Karen had written in the chat that early entrance to college in Australia is actually becoming harder, especially for those who are very young, probably due to child safety concerns.
Yes, and actually we experienced that too. We have a program that started in the mid 90s, and it's been going on for quite a few years, talk about the educational landscape. And it was not uncommon for us to get students who were 15 or so. In our program at the Bell and Blank at the University of Iowa, but the Bell and Blank Center is the one that sponsors it, is what we like to refer to as a cohort program. And so we would have some students who were accelerated, like, Jody or Regan, and then they were ready to leave high school early. And ours was just to leave high school 1 year early, but they were already accelerated. And some of them were 15. And we used to have no problems with that. And now the residence halls are very, very specific, and there is no getting around it. They have to be 16 because 16 is the age of consent. And thankfully, now there's so many options. I had that slide up there about 20 various options. Their access to coursework and to knowledge is something that people don't have to go so young. So yes, that doesn't surprise me to hear that. And I will just say that radical acceleration is a little bit more common in Australia. It's one of the forms of grade-based acceleration. But in the United States, we tend to not do radical acceleration to the same extent that they do in Australia.
I guess I would wonder
Oh,
too
by
with
the
all,
way,
yeah,
can I just say the Aussies are awesome. They use the integrated acceleration system, and we actually added a whole test just for them.
that's awesome. I was gonna add, I think, I guess I would wonder also if just some of, since COVID changed so much and like what that would mean for like online school and things like that, if that wouldn't be a potential pathway for some of those younger students too. But for sure, like what you were talking about, like AP classes, concurrent enrollment, all of those pieces in high school. So we have another question. Julie asked, do you find the new integrated acceleration system survey more user-friendly? I know teachers I've worked with in the past found the Iowa scale overwhelming.
Wow, that is a really good question. And I'm not like a Luddite, but I mean, I'm pretty technologically savvy, but that might be one of the things that people liked about the Iowa acceleration scale. You could take the paper, you could photocopy it, and you could fill it in. And some people did that. And so they bypassed actually having the team meeting. The integrated acceleration system is really designed, it takes you through everything. And my colleague, Ann Shoplick, who's one of the co-developers of the integrated acceleration system, along with our wonderful, wonderful technology person. I mean, they're right there. They get back to you right away. So I don't know if you're calling from the Denver area, but Denver actually does have access to some of those codes because the Denver Public Schools purchased them a couple of years ago. So we are happy to walk through things with you. So I don't know what to tell you. I think it's better myself. Well, they're two different instruments, but one of the things that I really like about it is that you don't have to rely on a full scale score. Like we have verbal, we have nonverbal, we have quantitative, we have COGAT, we have all different kinds of options for the scoring. And the interview with the students is awesome. And then there's just a lot more inclusivity with the team members. That's so I think it's better because it's online and it's interactive. But if you don't like that, of course, if you're on Facebook here and you're doing this, then you like it, right?
So we've got the questions coming in now. So one person asked for the QR code, and then another person said that the QR code isn't working. So asked if there's a direct link that they could go to.
Yeah.
So like the Yukon website would be the place, or
Yeah. Oh, I forgot. I'm not, sorry. Can you see me?
I can see you.
Oh, good. Then I did not. Let me just put this. I did not get rid of you. That was my big concern. So I did not do that. Now I have to just share.
We have a
Oh,
couple more questions too.
yeah. Let me get this
No,
up
you're
there and
good.
then I can
Yep.
just, I can just put that up and then we'll do that. I'll do this.
Perfect.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yes. Yep, I can.
Okay, perfect.
So for
So
everyone watching,
either email me or just go to the NCRG and go to, I didn't even touch anything. The ncrge.yukon.edu/acceleration.
Perfect.
That feel free to email me when you do that as well, because I think that Yukon that can sort of be overwhelming when you look at that, and I'd rather just talk through people. Oh, by the way, I will be at CAGT, and so if anybody wants to talk to me there about the study, I'm more than happy to do that as well.
Wonderful.
We have some
I
we have some new interesting research, but I was dissuaded from talking a lot about research.
I have a feeling you're gonna get some emails after this presentation.
Cool.
So
So,
Barbara asked, she said, I have an early access child, started first grade at age 5 here in Colorado, skipped kinder, and it was best decision ever socially too. However, I'm nervous at the possibility of further acceleration mid-year in the spring, losing the group friends mid-year. What usually happens with the kids who move to the next grade mid-year?
well, it all depends on the receiving teacher, which is why the receiving teacher absolutely has to be part of any decision-making process. And one of the things that I love about the integrated acceleration system is that we have a whole section in there, and it's one of the modules too for the training on the transition planning. And so that part is just so important. I would also recommend that you start slowly, like the student is still in the primary grades, if I
Yeah,
understand
they said
correctly.
first grade, looking that.
Yeah, so you could start by moving into, math or reading and see how that works out too. And then hopefully the parents would be involved to help support, play dates and things like that.
And Nicole
But I
asked,
understand that. I understand that hesitation and, trust the process.
mhm. Nicole asked, could you discuss what factors should be considered for 2E students accelerating in a subject area? How much weight should be given to achievement test scores versus aptitude and interest of the student?
Equal weight to everything. First of all, kind of the way we think about it, the way I think about it is going back to the definition. The student has to be ready for a faster pace, right? And there are ways to determine that. And one of the ways to determine that is kind of to just get a general sense of what their overall uh, cognitive ability is. And that's not, so it's not just for whole grade acceleration, for subject acceleration, it can be really helpful. But then to also know what their achievement is, and they do have to have achieved. And, mastery should be around the 90th percentile. It doesn't have to be 100%, but it should be close to the 90th percentile or above. But above level which is aptitude, is when they're ready to learn something new, and can you predict that they will continue to excel? And that's what the above level information gives you. Now, in our research, what we found is that it is less common for students with a specific learning disability diagnosis, especially in the area of written language, to be accelerated, because they oftentimes do need accommodations in the area of written language. But what do? If you have somebody who's really talented and really ready for more advanced learning opportunities, you can't hold them back. So you have to think about what those accommodations need to be as they're taking, for example, advanced placement. Some students who don't have a specific learning disability, typically developing bright students, can handle 3 or 4 advanced placement classes. The student with a specific learning disability may need to slow down and just take 1 or 2, and may need to make sure that they have them in such a way that they're not overwhelmed by that, but yet you're tapping into what their interests are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you guys, everybody, for joining us here tonight. We are going to, with that final note, say trust the process. Reach out to Dr. Assouline if you have any questions or if you would like to be a part of that University of Connecticut research project. And thank you so much for joining us.
Maybe I'll see you at CAG T. If so, come up and say hi.
Absolutely.
All
Take
right, I
care.
look